as I've always said, and I'm going to continue saying for now and in the future, is just I think people can get better at like sort of the business acumen side of how does community unfold inside of a business, and
Yeah.
what do we need to do as builders to make sure that we're both really good at building community. Like a lot of us are good at that, and that's great.
Yeah.
How do we connect that, right, to what companies like the outcomes they're looking for? Content is always, it was, it is, and it will be the most
Yeah.
important thing in community building. And I think what you're seeing is a lot of community professionals understanding that more and embracing it and putting more of their effort in.
Brian, I have to tell you that so many people recommended me that I should speak to you. And also after the launch of Community Strategy Academy, I was like, okay, this is the right time to speak to Brian and pick his brains on a lot of things that we're going to talk about today. So first of all, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And hopefully I live up to the hype.
So Brian, I think this is a standard, let's say something that I always ask to all my guests. Who is Brian outside of work? Because I think a lot of times we attach our personalities with respect to our professional journey. But if you would have to describe yourself outside of work, what would that be?
Yeah, it is an interesting question because I think we're all so multifaceted. I think there's so much more to people than what we do for work or what we see on LinkedIn or, whatever. So yeah, I mean, who am I outside of work? Well, I can tell you what I like to do. So, I'm an outdoors person. So I'm usually on a hike or running outside, or I live in Colorado. And so we're very outdoorsy, people. I like to volunteer at local organizations. So at least once a week, I spend a couple of hours, usually at the animal shelters, walking dogs, feeding cats, whatever. And those sorts of things, and I think I'm a huge sports fan. Like I love sports. I can't get enough. I'm always, watching sports and attending games and stuff like that. So, like everybody, I have plenty of hobbies and whatnot to keep me busy outside of this whole community thing.
Wow, I can definitely say Brian is fun outside of work as well. So, everybody who's watching this, hit Brian up for any sports events if you are going to attend in Colorado. But yeah, and Teddy, my next question is, I think I have always felt like, especially in India, this is back in 2016 when I used to tell people that, okay, I want to build a community of creators here in India. Everyone would be like, okay, what do you mean by a community? Is this a Facebook group or like WhatsApp group? Like, I think it was fairly nascent, I would say, here back then, but you started building communities since 1990s. And I just want to know how the last 2-3 decades have been. How did you think of starting this out, first of all? And what has been, like, let's say, the major trends you have observed in these past decades?
Yeah, I mean, as I always tell people, community kind of found me and not the other way around, right? I, sort of stumbled into it and just ended up making a career around it. So I've kind of just grown with it over the last couple of decades and seen those trends. I think you're right that, certain parts of the world are more mature than others in how they think about community, but that's okay, right? That's good. And it means we're reaching new people, we're reaching new audiences, we're teaching new people about community. So I think that's actually a really great outcome. As far as trends go, I think that there are some, what I would call eras of communities over the last couple of decades. I think it all started with support, for a lot of companies. I think it still does to a degree, but I think if you look at the 90s through maybe the early 2000s, that like 10 years was very much about how do we deflect tickets and, that sort of a thing. I think once social media came online, we all sort of said, oh, okay, like there's more to this community thing than support, and there's brand building, there's marketing, there's, all of those things. So I think you had a window there of us all kind of shifting how we thought about community and what that word meant and integrating social into it. And I think now we're in more of a phase where, at least in the United States, right? I think we're more in a phase now where most people understand community can be all of those things we just talked about in the last couple of eras and even more. So now we have product and, customer success and like all these groups kind of understanding the value of community and wanting to use it for their use cases. So I think that's all good news, and we've come a long way. We've learned a lot. We've taught a lot of people things. I think we still have a lot of work to do, but I think that we can look at that and say, hey, we've done pretty well for ourselves over the last couple of decades, but we have to just keep on going.
Yeah. And, before I come to my next question and to the year 2023, one trend that I have personally observed in the last 7-8 years is a lot of social media managers started becoming community builders, community managers, community leaders, probably because the internet was, the content and social media world, short form video content and newsletters and all these things were picking up really fast pace. So probably that kind of resulted into that shift. But in 2023 or let's say 24, the next year, what are, let's say, some skill sets that you feel a community builder or a community leader should definitely have? I think in the past I've observed maybe social media and content skills were really important. But what do you think are some of those skill sets that are needed?
Well, first I'll say that I think, it's no secret that over the last 10 years or whatever it's been, kind of since the advent of the Facebooks and Twitters and, all those kinds of things, that there was always sort of this weird, I guess, oil and water thing between people who described themselves as community managers versus social media managers. I think there is some validity to some of the arguments about how they might be different or that sort of thing. But overall, I think we're all trying to do the same thing, right? Which is, how do we connect our customers and how do we make them happy and give them what they need? And that if we do that, it'll build value for our companies and our organizations, whatever those are. So I never really bought into the idea that those were two wholly separate things or that we should be mad at each other or whatever. I've actually run teams in the past where we had both community and social underneath one umbrella and nobody died, right? Everybody was happy and it was okay. So I think, it's going to be fine. I think the trends, as I've always said, and I'm going to continue saying for now and in the future, is just, I think people can get better at sort of the business acumen side of how does community unfold inside of a business, and what do we need to do as builders to make sure that we're both really good at building community. A lot of us are good at that, and that's great. How do we connect that, right, to what companies, the outcomes they're looking for? Sometimes when I talk about this, people kind of oh, that's pretty cold, Brian. You're so focused on the business, you don't think about the members of the community. And I have to say that that couldn't be further from the truth. What I'm saying is, we certainly want to help our members, and that should be the goal. But to do that, first we have to convince businesses that this is a good idea and that they should invest in it. So to me, the business acumen, investing in the business side of it, is sort of means to the ends to get us to what we really want to do, which is, how do we help our customers or our members or whatever be successful? So I'm not sure you can actually do the latter without the former. And I think, that's probably where a lot of people should focus their efforts.
Yeah. And I think I've also observed a similar debate that goes around, let's say, with brand marketing. Sometimes everybody starts to think that, okay, no, brand marketing has to you don't attach business to it or don't attach those numbers to it. But the current market scenario also that we're living in, I think every founder or the CEO or the board would want to see business results as well from all the efforts that you're putting in. So definitely makes sense. Let's talk about the supply and / demand side of things as well. I think 2 years back, I was pretty much observing here in India, at least, that every startup, especially SaaS businesses, are thinking about starting a community of their own. And I have tons of examples about it. But right now they are a bit hesitant because they want to be focused. They don't want to have multiple channels of, let's say, growth or engaging with their customers, users, and partners. So I am at least seeing like a decline of new communities that are starting out here in India. But there is this huge supply pool of community managers, builders, and leaders who are already out there who upskilled themselves to be the community professionals in the past few years. And I'm seeing a bit of demand and supply gap right now. But have you seen similar trends? If yes, like what have those been? And if no, like what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this is driven by the market at large, right? So especially here in the United States, we've kind of been going through this inflation crunch and a lot of these things, which led businesses to lay people off and, cut budgets and whatever. And unfortunately, I think, a lot of community builders got caught up in that. And so what we typically see, though, is it's like, oh, companies don't care about communities anymore. They're laying everybody off. And it's like, well, but those people were part of a much larger, recruiters are getting laid off. And, customer success people and whoever. So I think we tend to sort of look at our own sort of local maximum and think, community's over, whatever. And I think that it's a temporary bump in the road. I think that the good news is from a go-to-market perspective, community does have a pretty good foothold in people's minds now we hear about product-led growth, customer-led growth, community-led growth, whatever term it is. In each one of those, there's some element of how do we get our customers together and help them help each other. And if we do that, our business will grow, right? So I think we're doing okay, on that. I think some of this is market-driven forces that we have no control over. I think to directly answer your question on the supply and demand of professionals, I think there's more people than ever that are interested in building communities and, building their skills around community. I think that's great for all of us, right? I think it means we all have to level up a little bit. And I think when the time comes that the investment comes back and, some of those things, it just means that there's a lot of talent to go out and build communities. So I think, what we're seeing now is sort of a bump in the road, is more of a uncontrollable economic trend than it is companies saying, oh, we don't believe in community anymore or something like that. And I think we have to be careful about not conflating those two things.
Yeah. I think it definitely makes a lot of sense because if given the opportunity, companies would want to invest in building those communities. It's just how the market scenario right now is. And their pressure that they're getting from board investors or whatever public in general, they would want to have it hyper-focused. I have a lot of questions.
I was just going to say that I think there's evidence to the contrary as well, especially around customer success, right? So here in the United States right now, customer success groups around most of these companies, tech companies in particular, they're the ones who hold the budget, right? Because they've been tasked with, these companies are basically saying, well, we don't think we're going to grow this year in 2023. So what are we going to do? Well, we need to spend our time and money keeping the customers we have. And so actually what I've seen is all these customer success leaders are like, well, how am I going to do that? And I can't scale a one-to-one, CSM model anymore. We have to do self-service. We hear them talking about digital hubs and scalable success. And so there's actually a lot of interest right now around, from like customer success leadership at tech companies in community. They call it something else. They call it digital hub and this kind of stuff. But I think, when it comes down to it and people are saying, oh, companies can't afford to invest in community, it's actually the opposite. It's like, you can't afford not to, right? Because it's the only way that you're actually going to get to some sort of like self-service scale and success. And I think people are starting to come around to that. So there's been, some positive signs on that front.
Yeah. I have quite a few questions about Community Strategy Academy, but if we get started on that, I know I will have 2-3 more follow-ups. So before we get into that section, have you noticed any community leaders trying to automate, let's say, certain tasks within the Slack channel or Discord groups using AI? Is there something new, like totally cool trending technology that's out there that some of the folks that you personally know or are aware of are using. I just want to know some of these tools or hacks that some folks are using, and then we'll move to Community Strategy Academy.
Yeah, we should. So I think, as I think about this, there's sort of three things I would talk about. One is things that you can go do right now today, which is, you see a lot of people using like Zapier and UiPath and like these process automation tools, and using those as part of the flows of how we orchestrate the back end of community and data and all that stuff. And the good news is all those things are available. You could go, get an account and do those today, which is awesome. And I'm seeing more and more of that over time. And I really appreciate it because I think people are learning how to operationalize what they do and automate away the stuff that used to take them hours and days. Now it's minutes or it's fully automated. So I think that's a really positive development in the industry, and hopefully we see more of that. The second bucket, I think, is the elephant in the room. It's AI. Everybody's trying to figure out, how do I use ChatGPT and like all the associated technologies. I think there is some utility in some of those on the authoring side and summarizing things and, helping you from a starting point when you're trying to create content or something. So we see a lot of that right now, a lot of experimentation. But I think the third bucket is what most people are waiting for, which is what I call the productization of AI, meaning right now it's a bunch of technologies, it's a bunch of APIs, it's, stuff like that people are experimenting with. But for the average community builder, we're not developers, right? And so the likelihood that we go cobble together 4 different APIs to build something for our community is probably not so likely. So I think what we're all doing right now is waiting for like platform vendors and new companies we've never heard of before that are going to come up saying, hey, here's actually a product that you can buy or that you can deploy in your community that can help you achieve tasks or do more, do it faster, whatever. So there's been positive signs that like some of the vendors are working on that and, showing certain things they're going to do in the future, but I don't think we're there yet. So what I would say to people is to prepare for that moment. Like, what can you do today to make sure you're able to take advantage of that when it comes? Is really, it's all about data, right? It's all about like getting your data in the right places, in the right format, and like ready for AI to consume it and build, features on top of it, right? It's the whole thing's a data play. Yeah.
And I think this would also automate a lot of things, of course, but also just save time for all the community builders out there. I think that's going to save them a lot of time and effort as well. Let's come to Community Strategy Academy. And before we discuss about how the early response has been, I want to know some behind the scenes about it. Since when have you been planning about it or thinking about it? What was the inception of this idea? And now that it's live, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I did an event when we launched this for a select group of people, and I'll tell you what I told them, which is the idea for this has been in my head for years and years and years. And it's really the culmination of kind of my entire career. It's me dumping my brain of everything I've ever learned about community into, video lessons and things that other people can go consume. I had the idea for like someone should build some sort of learning thing, years ago. And I actually started working on it kind of in 2020. And then like Noel Flowers was doing some really interesting stuff in the space. And I kind of thought, well, let's just go all in on that instead of competing against each other. And so I went and, worked with Noel and we built some stuff there that unfortunately has, kind of gone away or is going away or whatever. So I, this year, at the beginning of the year, I was like, hey, I think there's an opportunity here again to kind of think about what does an academy look like and what are the things people need to know and how can we package it up in a way that's going to be useful to people. So really kind of started thinking about it in the beginning of the year and then, really started working on it kind of in the, I would say, early summertime. And here we are. So that's where we're at today. And then we have this big roadmap of like, we're just going to build so much content that it's, ridiculous in the long run. So I'm looking forward to that.
How has the early response been? Like, what have folks talked about this? What are some feedback that you've gotten?
Oh, it's been amazing. I've gotten piles of feedback, most of it positive, but also a lot of people have said, hey, have you thought about this? What about this kind of course? This topic, that kind of, which has all been wonderful. And I just have pages and pages of notes, to make it even better. So I'm really proud of what we've built. And I think so far people are pretty excited about it and using it a lot. I think as of this recording, there's over 100 people enrolled in it. And they've taken like 600 or 700 lessons, and like 50 people have certifications at this point. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of people using it. And, I just see that as a sign for me that just keep going, like keep building more and, see where it goes.
We hope after people watching this episode, they would enroll for the academy, and we'll also spread the word about it here in India and within our community. I want to move to some questions which probably might not be directly relevant about community building, but something I want to know about your thought process and just your philosophical side of things as well. What is something that you believe in that most community builders don't believe in or don't agree with you on? Is there something that you have followed as a process or as a framework, but everybody else feels, this shouldn't be this way?
Yeah, I think the thing I've been talking about for many years now, as we talked about a little bit ago, is sort of this idea of the business side of it. I don't know that people necessarily disagree with it or whatever. I think what people would say is that, there's a balance, right, between how do we service both our customers or our community members and the business at the same time. And as I said before, my view has been and continues to be that we have to help the business understand why it's valuable and deliver some outcomes for them, or else we're not going to have an opportunity to deliver it for customers. I think that sometimes when I talk about this, people kind of think like, oh, Brian, you're just a corporate, shill or whatever. And I, on one hand, I can kind of understand that reaction, but I think what I'm trying to help people understand is how it actually works at some of these companies, and that if we want to deliver the things we want to deliver, we want to be better community builders, on some level, we have to kind of become business people. And I know that sounds tough, to some people, because they're like, well, I don't want to be a business person. I just want to run a community. And what I tell people is like, that's cool. Like, that's a decision you can make. Yeah, right? Absolutely. But you also have to understand the consequences of that decision and how that might impact your career or your success at a certain company or something like that. So, I don't know that people like fully disagree. I think it's more the debates we have is about like, where's the equilibrium? What's the balance of those things? And depending on who you talk to, there's different, kind of thought processes on that.
Yeah. And one of the things that I missed asking you while we were discussing about the trends and, just past few years and the coming few years, one trend that right now we're at least observing this in India is in-app communities. Like, for example, there's a fashion marketplace who has like started within the app itself and community where people create content. It's like an Instagram within a fashion app. And that's driving their engagement metrics really, really high. Of course, conversion metrics as well. And I think I'm also seeing this within few, doctors community and other marketplaces. And that's just becoming like a knowledge hub within a particular app. Are you also seeing similar trends, or have you observed this, or this is something that's, just very geographical specific?
Yeah, no, I think we're seeing community in all its forms creep into, different things, which is good to varying degrees. I wish there was more communities in apps. We've been talking about this ever since like the smartphone became this, ever-present thing in our lives. It's always made sense to me that we should bring communities closer to people. And what does that mean? It means putting it in the app that they use every day. as opposed to maybe making them go to another app or a website or whatever the case is. And so, I've been telling companies for like 10 years, you want to have your web-based community and all of that, but like, how do we bring it into your products? How do we bring it into the app so that people can just engage with it right there? We've seen some positive examples of that over the years, like Autodesk does that. We did it at Alteryx a little bit when I was there. The famous example here in the United States is there's a piece of tax software called TurboTax, and they famously have community right in the interface. You can ask a question without ever leaving, the product, which is amazing, right? And I just wish more companies would do that, because to me, it makes all the sense in the world to lower the barrier to entry and just put it where people are, as opposed to making them go somewhere. So I think it's a great trend, and I hope that we see more of it. Yeah.
And what are some engagement, let's say, strategies that people are adapting these days? I think meetups, or in general events where like weekly events or live sessions or AMAs were like a trend that communities and community managers were like looking after and trying out. Is there something new that's happening these days with respect to how community leaders can increase and drive engagement within the community?
Yeah, I think here in the United States, I do think meetups and in-person events are back in vogue. I think there's a bit of a pent-up demand, right, from sort of COVID, that people are excited to get out and go meet people again and, do something. And like, we've all just been on a million, virtual webinars and whatever else that I think people are excited to, kind of go do that. So I think you're seeing a resurgence of that type of community, which is good. I also think like a good trend is that content is always, it is, and it will be the most important thing in community building. And I think what you're seeing is a lot of community professionals understanding that more and embracing it and putting more of their effort in how do we actually build things that people want? And if we do that, then they will engage, as opposed to us thinking, we'll just put up a community and people will engage, right? So I think that's a good trend. And we're seeing more companies actually pair content writers and those kinds of things with community professionals on the same team sometimes. And I think that's great to see, right? It makes all the sense in the world.
Wow. Last two questions, and then we'll wrap this up. What are some trends that you think are going to come up in the next 2 years, or let's say next 5 years, within the community industry? I think as we spoke in the beginning, I was seeing a lot of social media managers becoming community managers. But what are some trends that you are predicting to happen in the next few years?
Yeah, I think on one hand, probably a lot of stuff's going to stay the same, right? I think it's easy to say, it's all going to change and it's going to be so different. I think there's a lot of things that we've spent a couple of decades building that are still going to always be relevant, right? So I think we should say that up front, that it's not like community as we know it ends tomorrow. And, I think a lot of that stuff is still real and relevant, and there's a lot of value to it. I think the second thing is AI, right? I think AI is going to play an interesting role, I'll say, in communities, both good and bad, right? I think there's going to be a lot of good things. I think there's also going to be a lot of struggles and a lot of learning, probably the hard way, with AI. And then I think the third one is that, I really have this core belief that companies, as time goes on, understand community better. And, I'll give you an example. What I find is now I go to a company and we're talking to different stakeholders, and I hear something now that I didn't hear 5 or 6 years ago, which is they'll say, oh yeah, we had a community at my last company and like we loved it and we want to do that here. So instead of, there's always going to be education, right? We'll always be teaching people about community because it's a relatively young practice. Even though it's a couple decades old, it's going to take us a couple more to ingrain it. But what you're finding is generationally, a lot of the people that are now leaders at these companies, they've either used it or seen it work at a previous company, or they grew up with it themselves personally. And so they're like, yeah, I love community and like I use it every day in my personal life so why wouldn't we do it as a company? So I think as time goes on, we're just slowly building up this, sort of understanding of why and what is community. And people are coming into companies and saying, yeah, I totally get it. Let's do it. So I think that's only going to continue. No. But I think it also is a challenge to us as community builders to say, don't let that go by. We need to keep working super hard. Even if people understand it better and they're more open to it and that sort of thing, that's great for us. But it also means that we have to rise to the occasion, right? We have to meet that expectation that they now have. So I think it's opportunity, but it's also just really indicative of we all need to level up our game as well, because what we don't want is a bunch of people that are excited about community and we underperform. And then they're like, oh, maybe this isn't like a good idea, or maybe we shouldn't invest in this. So I think it's on us, and that's the philosophy we all have to have.
Yeah, glad that you brought this up, because my next question was going to be about what are some common mistakes that you have observed community leaders and managers do. And actually, I would want to share one of the early mistakes that I did in my journey was we first started the community of artists and creators on Facebook group. Then we migrated them into a web-based community. That was not working out. So then we moved them into our Discord channel. And I think over the period of years, eventually we settled on WhatsApp. But then WhatsApp had certain limitations to their community features, of course. And I think that was one big mistake that I always felt, that we were not consistent with it in the initial few years. Once we got fixated on one platform, I think then things became better. But migrating to a different platform was always a challenge. And of course, when you're not heavily funded and you don't want to pay Slack that hefty amount of money for running a not-for-profit community, that was difficult. But what are some of the mistakes that you have observed a lot of leaders doing with respect to community?
Yeah, I think the number one mistake, and we've all made it, myself included, so I'm not picking on anyone. You want to talk about mistakes, you're talking to the right guy. I've made more mistakes, for everybody. I've made enough for everybody, trust me. I think the number one mistake that I see and that I would caution people about is just not taking the time to fully understand what are the goals of our visitors, users, members, whatever, you want to call them, or whatever stage they're in. What do they actually right? What are the outcomes that they're looking for? Why are they going to come to your community and spend their time, of which they have ever increasingly little of, right? Yeah. Because there's so many things in this. They could be watching Netflix instead of being on your community, right? So I think not taking the time to understand that, and then not taking the time to understand on the business side, okay, why are we doing this? What are the outcomes? How are we going to measure it? How are we going to know it's working? And then the blending of those two things together, because sometimes those things are at odds, right? They're not always completely, simpatico. And so I think that's the hard work of building a community now, is understanding both of your audiences and what they want out of this thing, and how do we figure out as best we can how to give them both as much as we can. And then that informs your strategy. And I think what you see a lot of, and you've seen a lot in the past, is people just saying they kind of skip all of that. And it's let's just go build a community and get it up and running and we'll figure it out later. But by that time, it's kind of too late sometimes, right? Because we've already missed all of the important strategic work by just jumping in. So I think sometimes you see this advice of and it comes from other places in tech specifically, where people are don't spend any time researching, just launch something and see how it goes and evolve it. And I think that works with certain kinds of tech products and go-to-market strategies and stuff. I'm not sure it really works that well with community, right? And there's some there's some spectrum, right? Like on one hand, yes, you don't need to be perfect or spend 900 hours doing strategy before you launch something. I'm not suggesting that, but I do think you want to do a little bit, and I'm not sure that the like move fast and break things is really a good idea in community, because the things you're breaking are people and their relationships to you and your company and to each other. And I don't think we want to break that, right? So I think just some caution about what's the process? Do we invest a certain, amount of time strategically just to make sure we're doing the right things? And if you do that, then you'll have a better chance of success, which is what we all want, right?
Yeah. And I think now I get your advice about why we should think about community also as, from a business perspective, because when you're thinking about it like business, you will value your customers. You will not take them for granted. And, you would really think about how you want to build this relationship. You would try to nurture them and, just be cautious about it, as you said, and not be like move fast and break things. Brian, I think this has been a wonderful conversation, insightful, and at the same time, just getting to know a lot of behind the scenes about what to do and your thoughts and perspective about different things. And I'm sure everybody who's going to watch this and read about this and listen to this will find this very, very insightful at the same time. So thank you so much for taking out the time and sharing all this learnings with us. I think everybody would just, skyrocket their journey much better after these insights that you have shared.
I certainly hope so. Thanks for having me on. I hope, this is useful to folks, and together we rise, we just got to keep going.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Brian, for your time. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Very welcome.